Hey guys, Ryan Earnhardt here from CreativeSoundLab.tv. Well, today we're talking about how to get great floor tom sounds. It's kind of elusive sometimes of how to get a great sound out of the floor tom. Here's a little about what it sounds like. Okay, this video was inspired by my friend Caden Painter. He's a fellow video creator, a sound designer, and an artist. I'll put a link for him in the video description below. And he mentioned this idea to me, and I'm like, wow, what a great idea. It's one of those problem areas of drum recording and drum mixing. So I want to kind of touch on a few pointers today on how to get a better floor tom sound. There's several different facets on how to make sure that all of the toms sound really full and really big. And I want to break it down for you today on not just the mixing end, but all the way down to some of the tech, to mic placement, even mic selection. Let's go back to the kit and check it out. So the first choice is the choice of microphone. A lot of times if you had just SM57s, you might have to position the mic a bit close. The closer you can get the microphone to the drum, the more low end you have. And sometimes you really need that low end boost. The issue is that to get more and more low end, the microphone has to get closer to the drum and sometimes closer in towards the center of the drum. And this could be kind of an issue if it's right in the way of the drummer. And so this is where the hypercardioid microphone comes in. It's halfway between the cardioid and the figure of 8. And as we get more towards figure 8, we have more and more proximity effect. This means we don't have to get the mic as close to get that low end boost. And furthermore, this means that the microphone is not in the way of the drummer. Now, this here is an Audix D4. I don't know what the pickup pattern is. It might be hypercardioid, might be cardioid. But some classic mics. The AKG 414 can do hypercardioid. The Beyerdynamic M88, hypercardioid. The 421 is cardioid, I believe, but that's a classic as well. The CAD M179 also can do hypercardioid. That's actually an incredible mic for toms. It sounds a little thin in some ways. It could use kind of some transformer kind of thickening, and that 414 definitely is great for that type of transformer type sound. I have an old BUOS that sounds fantastic. But let's hear this Audix D4. This is currently kind of my go-to mic on floor tom. We'll move on from there, talk about heads and tuning and suspension. The heads are a remote coded ambassador or coded emperor. In fact, the Emperor Smooth White is actually a very nice drum head for toms. It sounds incredible. It's kind of a bright sound, but also lots of lows at the same time. It tends to hold up well. But in general, I use coded ambassadors or coded emperors. Usually, the battered head is about a third below the resonant head. So the bottom head is higher than the top head, okay? So lower, higher pitched, okay? I know it's kind of opposite here, but lower pitch and then slightly higher pitch underneath, okay? Not all drums are going to be the same. Some are going to be easier to tune than others. With a floor tom, you just got to do your best. Sometimes the heads tend to kind of find a magic spot. And if that happens, don't mess with it. You know, you don't have to change a head just because it's old. Sometimes if you find your floor tom is happy, let it be happy, okay? Floor toms can be very temperamental, very difficult to tune. And I think it's just because it's such a big drum, and the slightest thing can make a big difference in tuning. So do your best. If it sounds great, run with it. If it doesn't sound great, keep trying, make slight tweaks around the drum, take the resonant head up slightly or down slightly. Just make slight movements until you find that the drum is sounding better. But of course, do a test recording. Does it sound good going into the mic? That's what really matters. Here in the room, I mean, this drum sounds kind of old, kind of unwieldy, and I can't say that it sounds actually that great, but in a recording, it actually sounds kind of cool. So, finally, is the suspension of the tom. Now, a lot of times, toms are suspended, they're floating, so there's no hard connection into the shell onto the stand. And a lot of times if you hold a tom and hit it, it sounds great. You put it on the stand and all of a sudden there's no resonance. One trick for floor toms is to use the Euler-X isolation pads for microphone stands. And this way you can actually put these pads underneath the floor tom feet, and it does a great job of adding sustain to the floor tom. Here it is with and without the ISO pads. One thing that's actually really easy to forget is the phase relationships. And anytime you're dealing with the low end of the drum kit, you really need to check the phase or the polarity with the close mics versus the overhead mics. So we have a lot of times two overhead mics. In my kit today, I'm actually using a coincident technique. It's like an XY, but it's called Bloomline, which is with two ribbons. In any case, you want to make sure that this mic is combining and actually making the sound of the floor tom stronger. Because if this mic and this mic do not work together, they're going to subtract out that low end. Now, a lot of times, it's fairly easy to hear the difference when flipping polarity on the close mic of the high tom, that rack tom. There's often a very strong relationship between the overhead and that rack tom. You can easily hear it. However, on this floor tom, a lot of times it's a toss-up. It's kind of hard to hear. So one theory that I have is, well, what if we can position the kit in the room, use this mic as a starting point for our drum mic setup. We pick a place in the room according to its room node and just the way the room reacts to these frequencies, and find a place that the floor tom is strong in that overhead. So this is often a very weak point of the drum sound. We usually don't have a lot of the fullness of the floor tom in that overhead. So this is a chance that we could actually start here and work backwards. Start at this overhead and check for the fullness of the floor tom as you set up the kit in the room and as you position the overhead mic. Let's go now to the mixing desk and I'll show you a little bit more about what I mean. I start out with checking the phase relationships. And a lot of times it's an ongoing thing. It's like EQ, I'll check it again. Because as you add EQ, it will affect the relationships of the mics to the overhead. Especially like a high-pass filter, it can definitely change how something reacts and adds in and sums with the overhead mics. So without anything on, let's just check it and just listen. And usually what I try to do is listen in mono. And that way it's very obvious which is the stronger orientation. And the idea is that you listen to the overhead first and you hear how loud the floor tom is in the overheads. And whatever that loudness is, it could be -20, let's say. So then you're going to take the close mic and bring it up to that same level, -20. Then when you flip polarity, you're actually really increasing the chance that you can hear it because they're the same level. So let's see if we can do that. Yeah. And surprisingly, that works. It doesn't always do that for the floor tom, go with the orientation that sounds stronger. High pass filter, could totally change things. People say you should always high pass, so you do it, and then it's messing up your floor tom sound. So just be careful, okay? It's an ongoing thing. You'd be surprised that there's just the most basic fundamental principle of checking the phase relationships. It's an ongoing thing. And in some ways, it's one of those advanced concepts that no matter how good you get, you always have to go back and, hey, let's make sure that stuff is working together. So from here, I usually go back to stereo. I kind of notice where the floor tom is in the stereo image, and then place the floor tom about where it is and a little bit louder than what it is in the actual overheads. That becomes a framework in which you fill in the close mics. Always check phase relationships to make sure that they're all working together. Now for compression, I usually think of a compressor that's very fast, but mostly for a fast release. Just about any 1176 plugin can work, okay, as long as it has a fast release. So I don't necessarily need this much compression, but it's important to kind of get the effect that you want and then dial it back. So for this, I might be hitting, 3, 4, 5, 7 dB, whatever it is, maybe do about half that. My initial approach is going to be to elongate the sound of a tom. So I'm trying to have the compressor let up. As the sound is ringing out, the compressor is letting off, and it actually sounds like it's getting a little bit louder as the drum naturally is decaying. You're really trying to shape the sound, almost like a transient designer. It's like you're kind of shaping the sound. So let's just go with that. Really no wrong answers here. Then from here, I had some EQ, just kind of playing around with that. Usually the fundamental for a floor tom is, 70, 80 hertz. Just don't get too carried away because there's other areas that, contribute to the sound of the floor tom. Another kind of difficult part to preserve is the high frequencies. And in one of my courses called How to Close Mic Drums for Ultimate Tone Control, I talk about preserving the high end of the floor tom mic in the position. You really need to protect the high end. Because if you have cymbals just bleeding in, then you really can't do much about boosting the high end here using EQ. It just makes the cymbals worse. So you have to make sure to really reject as much of that ride cymbal as possible. That's really key. And do whatever you have to. You can raise the cymbals up a little bit, but a lot of it is going to be the polar pattern of that microphone, making sure that the null of that mic is pointed to the ride or nearby crash cymbals. So the high end is nice, anywhere between 3 and 5K usually. Probably the most important part of any low end sound is the high end, because it's the way that our ears can identify what the heck it is. Is it a Moog synth? Is it a tom? Is it a piano note? I mean, it's those harmonics that are above the fundamental that help us identify what we're listening to. So, I mean, lots of things can make sound at 75 hertz, let's say. But it's the harmonics that identify it as a floor tom. Sometimes I actually find myself kind of boosting in odd areas. Like here I have it about 300, 320. And it's just a way to kind of find the maybe second or third harmonic, kind of boost that and actually make a little bit more audible the character of the drum. It's not necessarily attack, and it's not the fundamental. It's kind of the sound of the drum head resonating. It's almost like the sound of the shell. Between these three areas, the fundamental, the high end at 3 to 5K, and the second or third harmonic. I guess it's the third harmonic because we're at 300, and if the fundamental is about 75, 72, so yeah, 71, 40, 280, and we are 292. So yeah, we were pretty much right there. So let's see here. Yeah, 280, that would be the, I guess, third harmonic. So that makes sense why we would find something interesting there to boost. And it just kind of adds a little bit of character. Not much. Okay, this can really sound bad in a hurry. And you'll get people saying, why does it sound so bad? Because usually you kind of like get rid of like the low mids. But yeah, just to experiment with the EQ in those places. But ultimately, it's in the context of how this combines with our overhead. So, pulling in the overheads. So, I have some compression going on. I have a very fast attack and release. It could be any compressor you want. I mean, there's lots that work for drum overheads. So you're trying to minimize kind of the clunkiness of the toms, the clunkiness of the snare. You just want to make it sound fatter. But also, this brings up the sound and the sustain of the floor tom on every tip from this video. I'd love to know what you think of this video. I've been meaning to bring back the invisible whiteboard shot for a long time now. I only had one light that would fit that spot, and the structure of the light fell apart. I had to rebuild the light, actually. So it's been a long time coming, and man, I'm glad I brought it back. I'd love to know your thoughts on the different shots of today's video. I'm also running a second 4K camera, which is super sweet. But I will say I want to try something new. After each video is posted and goes live, I'm going to spend all of my time right there in the chat for at least the first hour. So if you hit that notification bell, and if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the notification bell, and I'll be available that very first hour after a video goes live. This way I can get a lot of good feedback from you guys and go back and forth in the comments. So again, I'd love to know what you think of this video. I'll be talking to you soon.